Hello, and welcome back to another episode of 8-Bit Monsters Monster Deconstruction for D&D 5th Edition. On today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Abyssal Wretch, found in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes on page 136. So if you'd like to join along, go ahead and get your book out and flip to that page, and we'll continue on. Hey Troll, it could be fun and interactive for the viewers. I guess it wouldn't work if they were on their phone and not away from their books. Oh well, let's carry on. The Abyssal Wretch is a CR 1/4 monster worth 50 XP, and when we look at Xanathar's Guide for encounter building, we're actually going to skip over the group monsters because this monster is such a low CR leveled monster that there's really no point in even bothering with it at that point. We're also going to skip the epic encounters because once again, this monster's CR is not high enough to be considered epic. Now, what we can look at is this monster as a solo encounter. And surprisingly enough, we can actually set this up as a 1-to-1 ratio right off the bat from level 1. So a first level player could actually fight one of these monsters by itself without any issue. I should put that in quotes because there's usually going to be some kind of an issue. Well, in some cases, that could work, Troll. But hopefully the players will assess the situation and work out the best course of action if they have to fight one-on-one. Okay, let's get back to the encounter building. Now, another thing we can take a look at is using this monster as a swarm monster. Now, not necessarily like a swarm of rats, but having more than 1 or 2 monsters on the field at any given time. Looking at the charts for Xanathar's Guide and how to use this as a swarm monster, we can see that we can put 2 monsters up against 1 player at 2nd level, 4 monsters up against 1 player at 3rd level, and we can then use 8 of these monsters for 1 player at 4th level and above. I wouldn't necessarily suggest using 8 monsters against 1 player because of the action economy, and a player being swarmed by monsters is going to probably end up dying or going unconscious pretty quickly at that point. So if you want to kill a problem player, maybe swarm that problem player with some CR 1/4 monsters? Hey now, I'm not recommending it, just speaking out loud. It is crazy to have 8+ monsters swarming one adventurer at any given time. Especially if it's on a battle map, and then that player is completely surrounded, and it just gets kind of crazy from there. But that's not the point. Anyways, let's take a look at the TLDW and see what's going on with our Abyssal Wretch. Now, the DCR for our Abyssal Wretch could be a 0 or a 1/8. The OCR is 1/4. And the FCR is going to either be 1/8 or 1/4. Whoa, slow down, Troll. These sorts of things take time to explain. I just wanted them to know that there's a difference here that they may be interested in understanding more of. So, like I was saying, now this is interesting because our printed CR is 1/4 as well. So, depending on whether or not our monster has specific conditions met, this monster is going to be actually lower or at the printed value we see in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. So if you're curious to see why this is, let's move on into the skills and traits section. Our Abyssal Wretch has a proficiency bonus of +2 because of its low CR rating. When we look further on in the skills section, we see that there really isn't much going on here for the Abyssal Wretch except for damage resistances and damage immunities. The damage resistances are for cold, fire, and lightning. And when those resistances are met, this is going to give the Abyssal Wretch technically 2 times the amount of hit points because of its low level. We can take this into consideration later on and add this into the effective hit points during the DCR section. Once again, Troll, you're getting way ahead of yourself here and jumping to all sorts of conclusions. If you'd let me finish, you'll see what I'm talking about later on. Great, let's finish this section up. The Abyssal Wretch also has damage immunities to poison, and poison only, but because poison is such a commonly found item, This also could be taken into consideration, but because of the resistances and immunities, we only take 1 when calculating the DCR. And in this case, the damage immunities are also using a ×2 multiplier to the hit points. So because of the low CR rating, our monster gets a 2x hit point bonus regardless for the resistances or immunities, and this will change as the CR levels go up. Beyond that, our Abyssal Wretch has nothing else going on in the skills or traits. There's no saves, there's no skills, there's no traits. Because we finished looking at the skills and traits, let's move into the DCR and take a look at what's going on here. And we can go over the 2 different versions of the DCR in this section. Now, our Abyssal Wretch has an actual hit point value of 18, which comes from its 4d8 hit points. And there's no bonus because the Abyssal Wretch's constitution is only an 11, which gives no bonuses. Now, our hit points of only 18 gives us a DCR of 1/8. Nothing too spectacular, but when we apply the resistances or immunities to the monster, this actually will multiply the hit points ×2 and give us an effective hit point rating of 36. Again, this is just from the 4d8 hit points, but this increases the DCR to a 1/4, which is pretty great. So if our monster is fighting magic users and throwing cold, fire, or lightning at it, then yeah, the resistances are going to be taken into effect, and the monster's technically going to have double the hit points. This also could be considered if there's a rogue, or maybe even a ranger or some other class using poison to try and attack the Abyssal Wretch and doing absolutely no damage, which again will double the amount of hit points to the 36 we saw as the effective hit points. Now, if the Abyssal Wretch is just fighting straight melee combatants, or is being damaged with radiant, or force, or thunder damage, or something else that isn't listed, then this damage is going straight through, and the monster is going to die much quicker because it's only got the 18 hit points for its actual hit points, and not the effective hit points from the resistances or the immunities. So this should be taken into consideration for the party layout. Now, looking over the monster's AC, we obviously see that there's nothing affecting the AC, and we'll go right into the effective AC of 11. Nothing too great here, and the 11 is only from its dexterity bonus of +1. When we look at our chart here, we'll see that for a DCR of 1/4 or 1/8, the expected AC is a 13, and because its effective AC is 11, this is -2 under, and this will result in a -1 shift from DCR 1/4 to DCR 1/8 if resistances are applying. Now, if resistances aren't applying, then the DCR is going to shift from 1/8 to 0. And we have to keep this in mind later on when we get to the FCR section. Now that we have our DCR set up, let's take a look at the OCR. Well, luckily our monster doesn't have any multi-attacks to worry about, and sadly only has one attack, and that's Bite. The funny thing though is that the Bite has the slashing damage property. I would assume piercing because it's a bite and not a slash, but maybe these are blunt teeth versus sharp, pointy teeth. Anyways, the Bite has a damage rating of 5, which comes from 1d8 +1, and that +1 is coming from the dexterity. Again, thinking of this as a dexterity-based attack, I would assume piercing, but the book has slashing as its printed damage. Now, a bite attack of 5 is going to rate this Abyssal Wretch with an OCR of 1/4. And since there's no other attacks for our Abyssal Wretch, we can skip any other damage calculations because it only gets the one type of attack, and we'll take a look at its effective attack bonus because once again, there's nothing affecting it. The effective attack bonus is +3. Looking over the chart, luckily we'll see that our monster with an OCR of 1/4 is expected to have an attack bonus of +3. When we looked back at the effective attack bonus, it also had a +3. So since our monster has an effective attack bonus of +3 and has the expected attack bonus of +3, this equals the expected rating and therefore results in no shift whatsoever in the OCR rating of 1/4. Now that we have our OCR established, let's look at the FCR and see what our monster is going to be rated at. So let's take a look at the FCR and start with the bite plus resistances and immunities if those happen to be more common in the party's composition. So our DCR will be a 1/8 plus an OCR of 1/4, which equals 3/8 or 0.375. We take that number and divide it by 2, which results in 3/16 or 0.1875, and due to rules of rounding, I would round this up to a CR 1/4. Great, this is the printed value of the Abyssal Wretch at CR 1/4. In regards to the bite plus no resistances, if the group composition is more melee based, the DCR will be a 0 plus an OCR of 1/4, which equals a 1/4. And when we average that out, we'll get a CR of 1/8. So, we have a CR of 1/8 if there are no resistances being applied, and this monster is technically overrated. Now that we have both versions of the FCR situated, let's take a look at the notes and see some of my thoughts as to why this could be the case for an even value or an overrated valued monster. Note number 1. What does the party consist of? Are there more casters or more melee? If there are more casters, then the CR is going to be a 1/4 for this Abyssal Wretch. More than likely, the casters are going to be slinging firebolts or some kind of frost damage, or even some kind of lightning damage. Also, if there are a bunch of players using poison on their weapons, the Abyssal Wretch will also be immune to that damage and only taking the base damage from the weapons itself. Note number 2. Does the party consist more of melee versus casters? If there are more melee members in the party, then this monster is going to be rated at a CR 1/8. And this is going to completely ignore all of the resistances and immunities that this monster is heavily relying on. If this is the case, then our monster is overrated, which usually isn't the case and is actually giving bonus XP because this should be considered a 1/8 monster if there are more melee members. Note number 3. In regards to the hit points and hit dice, and the absolute maximum I like to give out in cases of monsters having very low hit points. In this case, the monster could go as high as 32 actual hit points, which come from 7d8 hit dice. This also is taking into consideration the potential for resistances or immunities. If you decide to go with this and use the 32 hit points, then this would bump the DCR up to 1/2, and because of the low AC, this would downshift it one step to a DCR of 1/4. And when we do the math for the FCR, this would be a DCR of 1/4 plus an OCR of 1/4, which equals 1/2, and when averaged out, this would be a CR of 1/4. So you could really jack the hit points up all the way to 32, giving this monster some longevity, and still not affecting the final printed CR value. Next, let's take a look at the CR balance, and decide, is this monster balanced? Well, it depends. Again, it goes back to points 1 and 2 of my notes and asks, are there more melee or are there more casters? If there are more casters, then the monster's balanced. If there are more melee, then no, this is heavily leaning in favor of the players and giving them bonus XP. So finally, let's shift over to the CR review and get a slightly better understanding of how this monster is balancing out, if it is balanced. For the DCR, this could be 1 or 2 steps under the printed CR value, depending on whether or not there are more casters or melee present in the party. The hit points are a step higher if resistances apply, or they're even to the CR, and the AC is 1 step below expected, resulting in more attacks landing. Now for the OCR, in a very unusual case, the OCR is equal to the printed CR value. This is usually not the case, as we've seen in previous videos. Now for the bite and the DPR, this is actually equal to the CR as well. Again, not normally the case and is on the higher end for OCR 1/4. The other thing too is that the attack bonus is also equal to the expected rating. Usually our monsters have a much higher attack bonus, allowing more attacks to land, but because the attack bonus is equal to what's expected of the printed value, we have a monster that has an attack rating equal to its printed value, but its defenses are lower if resistances are ignored. Pretty interesting monster to look at this week, and I'm glad we've had a chance to look over this Abyssal Wretch. Thanks for joining me as we deconstructed the Abyssal Wretch from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Join me again next week as we deconstruct a monster down into its barest parts and see what actually is going on with these monsters. If you've been enjoying these videos, I would really appreciate it if you would share these videos with your friends, your D&D groups. Shoot, if you play Pathfinder or Call of Cthulhu or any other TTRPG, consider sharing it with them. I would really appreciate it, and it could help the channel grow. Until next time, when we deconstruct another monster from D&D 5th edition, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.